Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Sadi, and I will be teaching you on element of scientific thought. Element of scientific thought is a scientific method which emphasizes a method for acquiring knowledge that has characterized the development of science since the 17th century. It involves careful observation, applying rigorous skepticism about what is observed, giving the cognitive assumption that can distort how one interprets the observations. It involves formulation of hypotheses via induction based on such observation, the testability of hypothesis, experimental, and measurement-based statistic method. And of course, it is a procedure that varies from one field to another, and it's a process in the scientific method which involves making conjectures, deriving predictions from the hypothesis as logical consequences. There are different ways of outlining the basic method used for scientific inquiry. Now, these methodological elements and organization of procedures tend to be more characterized with more characteristics of experimental science than social sciences. Each element of scientific method is subject to peer review for possible mistakes. We cannot talk about sciences without talking about knowledge. Before the invention of sciences, we all know that knowledge and sciences are based on common sense. Knowledge can be said to be an understanding, familiarity of information one gets by experience. Knowledge can be transmitted culturally, formally, and intentionally from generation to another. Language and cultural transmission enable the accumulation and growth of knowledge. Common sense knowledge is called typification, looking at common sense of something. In primitive society, practice of magic hinders the development of natural things or natural sciences. Why? Because people see magic as source of livelihood. Whatever happens in the society is considered to be magic. Magic is integrated in religion, and at the process, we have two types of knowledge, and that is where we have the scientific and non-scientific knowledge. Now, scientific knowledge has various forms. It comes in literary understanding, it is religious in understanding, natural and scientific in understanding, philosophical understanding. Non-scientific knowledge can come as intuition and as a use of common sense. But knowledge, the problem with knowledge that is based on non-scientific is the fact that it's misleading and not testable. But scientific knowledge that is based on what we have today is what we see as scientific, and what is based on testability of knowledge. Institutionalization of scientific knowledge. Different societies investigate. Technically, science of yesterday has become common sense of today. Science have become technical and specialized. Now it is based on validity, logical, clarity, consistency, and generality. In everything you do based on sciences, it has to be valid, it has to be logical, it has to be consistent, and of course, it has to be testable. However, the consequences of new discovery in sciences is the way it fits into the structure of the existing knowledge. Now, science can come as a form of knowledge. People base their conduct on knowledge. The rise of empirical science and the scientific knowledge has given knowledge an important aspect in the society today. Society is forging towards specialized technical knowledge due to growing complexity of technical base of social life. Specialized technical knowledge is shifting to scientific knowledge through verification. Science guide against bias, which may influence the work we do. Work should be open to criticism and critical examination. Science knowledge home are given beyond subjective um, judgment. Now, we cannot talk about the fact that we are studying scientific and element of scientific thought without talking of what sociology is all about, the development of sociology, what is the relationship between sociology and these sciences, why are sociology concerned about what is happening in the society based on sciences. The development of sociology, is important because it attempts to establish sociology as a discipline. It provides an insight on how the founding fathers battled to put it within the realm of social sciences, defining it as natural science of society. Sociology is a science of the nature and growth of society and social behavior viewed as science of society. Giddens in 1986 defined sociology as a social science having as its main focus the study of social institutions brought into being by the industrial transformation of the past 2 or 3 centuries. Sociology is the study of human society, human behavior, and we have understanding of the society as social phenomena. And in every society, we have differences in the way we do our things, our culture, our dance steps, our ways of life. And sociologists are concerned with group rather than single persons. Sociology is a discipline with its own concepts and theoretical perspectives, which makes it distinct as a discipline. Sociology has boundaries that include historical approaches, empirical approach, analytical approach. Now, what are they all about? If you're talking about historical approach, we're talking about the fact that we cannot study the society without looking at the aspect of the historical matters. You look at the society based on history, how we came about, where we are, and of course the formation of what we were before we came to where we are. Then we look at the current issues and why we have those current issues because of the changes that is affecting the society in one way or the other. And that is why we have the empirical approach that comes with what the current issues in our society. Then now we have the analytical approaches that defines and explains society. Now sometimes you look at the society and you wonder why we have things the way we are. Why do we have differences in our ways of life? Why do we have differences in the way we do our things? But yet we can never be the same in everything because we vary with our society, we vary with our ways of life, with everything. And that is why you cannot study sociology without looking at the historical approach, empirical approach, and the analytical approach, which shares as the boundary of sociology. Now, sociology emerged in the 18th and 19th century due to the present social condition of the time. Rapid changes in Europe, which brought an intellectual period with enlightenment, ways of thinking. People started thinking, change started coming, and of course, this brought about intellectual period where people started talking about why do we have differences in the way we do our things, why do we have changes in our ways of life, why do we have differences in our culture, and so on and so forth. These changes now brought a lot of challenges, and of course, which brought challenges to the old traditional notion. Initially, we have homemade food, homemade bread, we use clay pots, we have wooden pots that we use, clay pots, and our mats are woven from our palm trees, and so on and so forth. But with the rapid changes in Europe, which brought about intellectual period where people started thinking, people started viewing the society from different perspectives, you discover that those changes brought about new invention, new innovation that brought about what? Revolution, evolution of things, where things now change. There was also the great revolutionary era, the American War of Independence and the French Revolution. French Revolution brought the end of ancient regime and realization of justice and freedom. Now, all those things now brought about freedom, justice, and of course, what we have now. It brought general reorganization of the society. That is what we have today as democracy. Initially, it wasn't the way it was now. Initially, our ways of things were done collectively. We have our ways of life that has to do with individual ways of life. But now with industrialization, urbanization, and of course the change is taking place that was brought as a result of this change, you discover that it brought about increase in what we do, it brought about new invention, new innovation, and of course the advent of sciences that brought about a lot of differences in what we have today. It also brought about industrial revolution, shifting manufacturing from home to large-scale factory. Most of the things we used to do before in our homes are shifted to the factories. Why? Because of the simple fact that initially we make our homemade bread, we weave our mats, we do our things at home, but now everything has been shifted to the industries because of the changes, because of revolution in industry, and so many things. Transition from agrarian handcraft production to an industrial economic base on factory and machines, bringing about the birth of sociology. Now, sociology came as a result of all those things. People started asking questions. Why do we have differences? Why are things changing? Why do we have our ways of life, the way we bake our bread at home, the way we mold our pots, the way we do our things in our various communities or in our various individual villages are being shifted to the industries. Why? Because of the changes, because of the winds of change that came and took over. And of course, people wanted to know why the difference, why the changes, and so on and so forth. And that was what brought about the birth of sociology. Because scholars were curious, scholars wanted to find out what is it all about. Now, with the increase of number of scholars challenging religion, why? Because initially religion was seen as ways of life. Everything we do is attached to religion. If anything happens within a society, they will say that a lot of people attach it to the gods. They will say the gods are angry and we need to appease the gods, or we need to do certain things towards what helping in appeasing the gods so that we won't have problem within the society. But with the advent of our industries and of course the changes that is taking place, people now started challenging religion and philosophical explanation of the universe. The people wanted to know, why do we have differences? Scientific method now became the vehicle for understanding the nature of the society, not religion like we used to be. Initially, religion was seen as ways, but now scientific method now became a vehicle for the understanding. Now, we cannot talk about all this without talking about whether sociology is a science, because we're talking about element of scientific thought, and we're talking about how sociology came about. We're talking about how all those things brought about what we have today as element of scientific thought, because we have a lot of scholars that we are concerned, they wanted to know what is it all about and how it came about. Excuse me. Now, is sociology a science? Before attempting to answer the question, we have to understand what science is all about. What is science? Science is the use of systematic method of investigation, theoretical thinking, and the logical assessment of argument to develop knowledge about a particular subject matter. Now, you look at sciences, which is also defined by Robertson as the logical, systematic method by which knowledge is obtained and the actual body of knowledge produced by this method. In every way, science is telling us now that if you are carrying out a research, it has to be logical, it has to be systematic, and it has to be accurate. It has to be bias free, and that is how you get into getting a scientific knowledge. And of course, we cannot talk again about what science is all about without looking at the differences between science, natural science, and social science, because science itself is divided into two. We have the natural science and we have the social sciences. The natural science studies physical and biological issues that concerns the society, while the social science now studies various aspects of human behavior. They deal directly with human behavior, they deal with the way we behave, they deal with our culture, they deal with our food, they deal with our dance steps, our attitude, and everything that concerns human behavior within the society, and how those behaviors are inculcated in the child from the aspect of socialization. And of course, all those things are important in the aspect of studying sociology and the element of social sciences. There are significant differences between the two branches, but the both of them are committed to the scientific method. Why? Because science starts at the premise that there are some underlying social order in the universe. They follow a regular pattern. Everything you do have to be followed based on pattern. It's just like building a house. You cannot start building a house from the roof. You have to lay the foundation. By digging the foundation, you have to lay the foundation, you build it, then of course then you start thinking of roofing it. And of course that is how the process are. You have to start gradually, and it has to be systematic and of course logical. Science starts at the premise that there are some underlying social order in the universe. They follow a regular pattern. Therefore, we cannot make generalization on statement that applies to most cases which are similar. Generalization is important in science because they place meaningful event in a pattern that can easily be understood or be understood. It makes it possible to analyze relationship of cause and effects. What are the causes? What are the effects? You look at the both. If you are generalizing, they can be predict, or you can predict why things are happening, why it can happen again given the occasion, if given the right occasion. For example, now, if I am to carry out a research in a particular thing, and of course, given a particular environment, if given that environment again on the second aspect or the second view, given a particular or the same kind of environment, you might not be surprised to get the same result based on what you have. But in social sciences, it becomes a little bit difficult. Why? Because of the simple fact that the only constant thing in life is change. And of course, human beings are bound to change, most especially if they notice that you are carrying out a research on them. And of course, which they know will affect you, it will affect your the judgment based on the findings at the end of the day. But that is why sciences does not generalize, predict, or explain event alone, but also carry out these functions of what a systematic aspect, whereby you carry the function gradually from one step to another, and it relies on careful systematic analysis of verifiable evidence. Every topic in science is open to further testing, to reinterpretation and correction. Sociology is a study of social aggregates and groups. It studies man and the consequences of being a member of the society. It deals also with social institutions and the scientific study of behavior. Can sociology achieve the same kind of precise, well-founded knowledge that the natural science have developed? Is a serious question that most sociologists and the students of um, element of scientific thought should take into cognizance. Why? Because of the simple fact that we look at sciences, sociology as a science, as a social science, then we have natural sciences, then can sociology, which is seen as social science, achieve the same precise and well-founded knowledge that as the natural science? The positive school of thought believe that sociology should resemble the natural science in procedures and finding, since they use the same methodology of hypothesis and applications. Why? Because applications and methodology that the natural sciences uses are the same thing with what the social sciences uses. Sociology should carry out their research objectively, avoid making any value judgment, and should remain value neutral. Sociology involves systematic method of investigation and the assessment of theories and hypotheses. Sociology is also a science, but a social science because it deals with human, and both natural and social sciences make statements about the world which can be verified through empirical testing and observations. Though social science have claimed to science, but this differ in terms of concepts, the question they pose, the method used in answering these questions, and the sort of result and explanation they consider. Sociology is a science that it produces empirical, verified statements. Now, what are we saying? We are saying that in every thing sociology does, because they are science, every statement they make or every result at the end of the day should be empirical, should be verified, and of course it is prone to assessment again. Now we cannot talk about all those things without talking about what the characteristics of sciences are. Characteristics of science comes in different way. Scientific method depends on increasingly sophisticated characterization of the subject of investigation. The characteristics are as follows. One, it must be measurable. In everything you do, it must be measurable in scientific work. Scientific work must be measurable, as also accompanied by estimate of the uncertainty. There might be uncertainty at the end of the day, but then it has to be measurable. And of course, in everything you do again, it has to be what you have to define your area. Measurement demands the use of operational um, definition. Now, all those things are important. You don't study sociology, you don't study scientific method without looking at all the characteristics. Like I said, one of the characteristics again is tactical. It is factual because it starts from facts of reality. Now, in carrying out scientific thinking, it has to be factual because you have to look at what you are studying, and it has to be based on reality. It has to be analytical, it has to be precise. Precise in the sense that it must be precise, whereby you don't have to be biased and you don't have to add up to anything based on the information. The information you get is the information you are given as it is. It has to what to be symbolic. The symbolism in scientific thought appears in the capacity of abstraction that every person must have to generate mental representation that are real. It has to be communicable, communicated data and reflect on them. Communicable in the sense that everything you do has to be communicated. Why? Because of the simple fact that it is prompt to verification, it is prompt to another testing. Now it has to be verifiable again, has to be tested under different conditions, and of course, methodologically. The methodology plan the steps in which you have to follow. And of course, it has to be predictive. Scientific thought accurately predict future events. It has to be unbiased, it has to be objective, it has to be, like I said, accurate, and it has to be reliable. In scientific analysis, all those things are important. Why? Because every steps you take, everything you do, you have to look at how precise it is. You have to look at how objective it is. You have to look at how reliable your information is. Why? Because if they are not reliable, and once you attach sentiment in carrying out your research, you discover that at the end of the day, your findings will be unbiased, or it will be biased. Why? Because of the simple fact that you don't have to attach sentiment to your findings and all those things. Now, every aspect of human behavior is a source of possible investigation. Scientists question the world that human has created and lived in. Sociologists noticed patterns of behaviors as people move through the world using sociological method and systematic research within the framework of scientific method and scholarly interpretative perspective. Sociologists have discovered patterns leading to natural changes Sociology makes use of methods of research such as experiment, survey method, field research, but human and their social interaction are so diverse that it seems unscientific sometimes. That is why scientific model work for studying human behavior differs, like I said, based on the aspect in which you are studying and the hypothesis and also the theoretical aspect of it. When is scientific, what then is scientific method? Scientific method involves developing and testing theories about the world based on empirical evidence. It is defined by its commitment to systematic observation of the empirical world, sought to be objective, critical, skeptical, and logical. Excuse me. It involves a series of prescribed steps established over centuries. Now, there are steps in which you have to follow, and those steps are what makes your work scientific in method. Now, scientific in the method in the sense that first, if you are carrying out a research, you have to ask a question. You don't carry out a research without asking a question. A question can come in any format. You want to carry a research, is it on is it on drug addiction? Is it on prostitution? Is it on cultism? Is it on examination malpractice? And so on and so forth. You ask a question. Asking a question then brings you to research existing sources. Where do you source your information? How many works have you gone through that looks exactly like the one you are trying to work on, so that it will give you a backing? Then you formulate a hypothesis. What is hypothesis? Hypotheses are tentative statement. They are statements you made, and unless proven correct, of course it is not correct, it is just a statement. But at the end of the day, if proven correct, then it becomes the hypothesis in which you have designed. Then of course you design and conduct a study, you draw conclusions, and of course you report your results. Result studies provide people with access to knowledge on culture, rituals, belief, trend, attitude. Research wants to minimize the study reliability. Now, everything you do, you check, it depends on if the student is reproduced or if the study is reproduced by following the same research protocol. Now, like I said earlier on, sometimes you get the same answer if given an opportunity to carry out the same research on the same environment with the same everything that concerns the research. But then sometimes it changes because like I said earlier again, that human are bound to change, most especially if they notice that you are carrying out a research on them. They are bound to change, and of course it will now change your findings at the end of the day. Research also strives for validity, which refers to how well the study measures what it was designed to measure. Sociologists can use the scientific method not only to collect but also to interpret and analyze data. They apply scientific knowledge, logic and objectivity, focus and consistency as possible in particular study. They ask questions, they describe a problem, they identify the specific area of interest, then they study how or study should be narrow enough to be studied. Now, if you are carrying out a study, the area in which you are studying, of course, supposed to be what? To be narrow. For example, now, drug addiction in Nigeria, the effect of drug addiction to the development of Nigeria is really broad. Why? Because if I'm carrying out such a research, it means I'm covering out Nigeria, and the population of Nigeria alone is so large that, of course, I won't be able to cover. And that is why, in identifying such, you have to narrow your um, scope because of time and because of other logistics. For example, now if I'm carrying out another research on the aspect of children, are single parents with children happier than married people? without children? The question here is, how can happiness be measured? Why? Because of the simple fact that if I'm talking about happiness, it is really difficult to measure happiness. If I said I'm happy, how do you know? How do you measure how happy I am? Topic was to be framed as a research question when forming research question. Operation definition is important, or operational definition is important. Why? Because if I'm carrying out a research, now operational definition now becomes important. If I don't define the terms in which I want to carry out the research, it becomes difficult for me to carry out the research. Why? Because we differs with the concept, we differs with what we feel, and that's why in every aspect you have to define the concept. Of course, by operationalizing a variable of the concept, all researcher can collect data, uh, methodological all researchers can collect data in a way that supports the overarching goals of validity and reliability. Hygiene can mean different things to different people. For example, again, measuring hygiene, it means different things to different people. What I see as hygiene might not be hygiene to somebody. Somebody only sees hygiene as brushing his teeth, appearing neat, and of course, without thinking of other aspects of the hygiene. The next step in carrying out the research, after looking at the question, after looking at all those aspects of the operational definition or conceptualization, the next thing is literature review. You look at the review, and of course, from literature review, you go to the field, you tell us how you want to take, what kind of sampling method you want to use, what kind of research design you want to use, and of course, how you want to use it. And of course, at the end of the day, if it is questionnaire, or is it interview method, or observation method, or in-depth interview, is it a focus group discussion, based on the kind of topic in which you have chosen, and based on the kind of people in which you are trying to administer or carry out the research on. Because sometimes you go out to carry out a research, you discover that some of the people are not educated enough to fill in your questionnaire, and of course, some you have a language barrier, and you need an interpreter in which you will interpret. And sometimes, if care is not taken, you find it difficult to carry out the research. Why? Because of the simple fact that at the course or at the process of um, getting your information, the interpreter might not interpret it based on what the person is trying to say. All those things are issues in research. Now, all those things, again, you cannot do all those things without formulation of hypothesis. Like I said earlier, if you remember, we talk about hypothesis, and I told you that hypothesis are tentative statement. People commonly try to understand the happiness of their findings of their world. Social science develop hypotheses for the same reason. Hypothesis is a testable, educated guess about predicted outcome between two or more variables. I want to predict, I want to know what it's all about. Is it possible, or it is possible it is a possible explanation for specific happening in the social world, and allows for testing to determine whether the explanation holds true. Sometimes you test it, or on most occasions you test hypothesis to know whether what you said is true or lie. For example, now I can decide to make a statement on a particular thing. It's just a statement, it's just a prediction. I am just making a tentative statement. But how true is my statement? How valid is the statement? It can only be valid when I find out, or when I test, or go out to find out by testing whether it is true. Hypothesis will predict how one form of behavior or human behavior influences another. The independent variable is the cause of the changes of the variables that influence the other variables. Now, dependent variables is the effect of variables that is changed. Now, if we are talking about hypothesis, we're talking about how you make your tentative statement towards getting a particular information in which you want. Now, in everything you do, apart from the hypothesis, we have what we call variables. In carrying out a research, again, you have to look at your variables. You have dependent variables and you have independent variables. One depends on other, and that is why you can make mention of a particular thing like the 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 causes, the intake of alcohol has effects on the development of the youth in Nigeria. Now, lack of reading in schools is the cause of examination malpractice, or drug addiction is the cause of examination malpractice, or lack of constant attendance in school is the cause of failure of exams. All those things are just statements, but then one depends on another. If I attend my school, I will not fail my exams. If I concentrate on school, I will pass my exams. If I do the needful, I won't have any problem. All those things are issues in sciences. And of course, that is why in social sciences, in element of scientific thought, we look at things like the variables. All those things are important because, like I said, they depend on one. Now, we'll come to that under the component of social science theory, discussing the component of social science theory, because we cannot talk about all those things without talking about the component of social science theory. Theory itself is vital to the course. A good theory is essential part of a discipline. You cannot make a statement, or you cannot carry out research without a theory, because theory helps in the understanding of this discipline better and also exposes students to component of social theory. Why? Because with theory now, you tend to understand the situation better, you tend to understand the world better, you tend to understand your work better. The component of theories are as follows. We have concepts, we have variables, we have relationship between variables, we have prepositions, hypotheses, and of course, the theories. Now, I will explain this one after the other so that we can be able to understand. Concept provide us with tags or label for a thing or an idea. What we make of the world depend on the concepts. They are mental image or perception that are concepts that are meaningful. Now, what are we saying? For example, now, they are meaningful in the sense that they give you understanding of the situation because they label what you are doing, they give it a tag, they give it a name. For example, now, if you're talking about gender, the next thing that comes to mind is it a man or a female? A male or a female? Now that gives you a label. It's a male, it's a female. So if you're talking about a particular thing, age category, what age, what density, then it gives you a label. It gives you a particular stage in which you are looking for. For example, I want to carry out a research on women. Then the next thing, how many women do I want? Does it, with the question I'm asking, does it involve men? If it has to be to involve anything that has to do with maternal health, then it might not involve men. Why? Because it has to do with women aspect of the issues that does not concern the men. All those things now, it gives you label. Now, concept serves two purposes in sociology. They distinguish and draw our attention to phenomenon which has not been considered. They serve as shorthand description and as instrument for analysis. And of course, they are most common, we have most common concepts like bureaucracy, we have kinship, we have social class, class action, and all those things are concepts that people look about or think of taking into note. Now let's note, lack of agreement in the use of concept is a primary source of difficulty in sociology. Why? Because scholars varies with what they see as concept, how they view it as concept, and of course their own definition of a particular thing or particular concepts varies. Why? Because what I see or what I feel as bureaucracy might not be what another scholar see as bureaucracy, or what I see as democracy might not be what others see as democracy. And that is why definition of concepts now becomes a little bit an issue with sociological aspects. Now, variables, if you're talking about variables, we're talking about concepts such as age or destiny that can take on one or more than one value along a continuum. The term variables involves a lot of values. Variables can be quantitative, which is income level, educational level, educational level, and so on and so forth. While quantitative variables consist of discrete categories that than numeric units. They measure differently in kind, sex, stroke, gender, marital status, group members. Now, if you're looking at this, you discover that marital status, somebody can be single, somebody can be married, somebody can be divorcee, somebody can be separated. So there are a lot of things attached to it. There are also independent and dependent variables, like I made mention earlier on. Excuse me. Independent variables causes something to happen because it's independent on its own. Then the dependent variables now is depending on the independent variables, because the independent variables now will cause the dependent variables um, will cause the dependent variable. For example, dependent variables now depend on independent variables. For example, marital infidelity causes divorce. Marital infidelity is the independent variables, while divorce now is the dependent variables. Why? Because if I am not, if I'm faithful in my marriage, I won't be divorced. So now divorce now is dependent on my being faithful or not being faithful. So that is the difference between dependent and independent variables. Now, what is the relationship between these variables? When we say variable x and y are related, it means a change in x result to change in y. The relationship is referred to as correlated or correlation, in the sense that if a change in x brings about a change in y, it is now called a correlation. For example, increase in population leads to increase in crime. It means the variables of population and crime are related or correlated. But if increase in population does not come with increase in crime, then the variables are uncorrelated. Now let's talk about preposition. It is a statement about one or more concepts or variables. Preposition that discusses a single variable is described as univaral, while bivarial preposition discusses two variables and multivarial discusses more than two variables. Like I made mention, one variable has to do with a particular thing. I'm discussing about a particular thing. But if I'm talking about two variables, I'm talking about a thing causing another. For example, alcoholism causing rape, or lack of committed in school causing failure in exams. That we are now talking about two variables. We're talking about a particular thing, dependent variables now, and independent variables. Those are two variables. But if you're talking about more than two variables, we're talking about multivarial analysis or multivarial preposition, whereby you talk about two or more. For example, now, if you're talking about alcoholism is causing lack of concentration in school and prostitution, we're talking about multivarial preposition. Or if we're talking about malpractice in school, we say cultism is causing failure and other thing. It can be rape, it can be any other thing. That is what we see as multivariate preposition. Now, hypothesis now is, like I said earlier on, is tentative, testable statement about variables. Weber defined hypothesis as a tentative assumption made in order to draw out and test its logical and empirical consequences. It is also an insufficient statement which requires observable evidence and, tentative explanation. Sorry. Hypothesis must be susceptible to empirical investigation. The longer couples stay, the less likely they are divorced. Now, these are statements. The longer couple stays, the less they are divorced. But on several occasions, you will discover that there are couples who are married for 25, 30, 40 years and yet are getting divorced. So this one is, this statement is hypothesis that can be tested and at the end of the day proven to be true or wrong. You test hypothesis to refute it or reconfirm if the statement must be precise. Hypothesis should include opinion, exclude opinion, value judgment, and of course, everyone should attend, like for example, everyone should attend religious worship on Sunday, which is not real or is not a reality. It's just a statement. Everybody should attend, every Muslim should attend Jummah prayer. Is not reality. Why? Because it is just a statement that can be tested to prove whether it is right or whether it's correct or not. Now, theories now provide answers to why and how questions are being asked. It provides explanation and prediction of social phenomenon by relating the subjects to interest to some other phenomenon. If I'm carrying out research like broken home causes juvenile delinquencies, I will have to look for a theory to suit. Is it possible but untestable explanation? It is a possible but untestable explanation. Theories is an attempt to explain particular phenomenon. Component of a theory are concepts and variables. Theory is a series of logical interlocking statements involving many concepts, variables, and relationships. From a theory, we can deduce a hypothesis. If the theory is shown to be correct, then our confidence in the theory is improved. Why? Because at the end of the day, if I test my theory based on the research I'm taking and it suits my work, then it is, we say the theory is accepted. Now, sociological research methods. We have a lot of research methods in sociology that, of course, are scientific in nature. There are several methodologies adopted in sociology when conducting research. However, the distinction between what is scientific and unscientific can be determined by examining the research or classifying it into two categories. We have what we call descriptive research and explanatory research. Descriptive research, now this type of research focus on social reality, describing of providing facts about social world. It deals with how and what question. How, why, how comes about a particular phenomenon and what are the causes of rape, what are the causes of failure, what are the causes of drug addiction. Now the questions, for example, like what are the percentage of people under the influence of drug, what can be done to reduce it. The main aim is to provide data on social facts. Social facts are reliable and valid items in information. Goal of descriptive research is to provide an accurate picture social reality by showing social facts which are both reliable and valid. Now, in every, like I said, we have two types of research, descriptive research. Now, are trying to what? Describe the social phenomenon by looking at how and what questions. They try to get information on why do we have such kind of issues in the society, and of course, what are the reality of such kind of things. When we are talking about descriptive, the explanatory research now is the other aspect of the research that says it tries to explain the way in which a question is asked, the answer to why questions. When description is answering to what questions, and of course how questions, the explanatory research is answering to why questions. It concerns itself with the problem of causation. What are the causes? Why? What are the causes? Centered on causes and effects. Now, those are the types of research we have. We have descriptive research and explanatory research, and they are all part of what scientific explanation towards arriving at answers. Survey research, it is most common popular method in sociology. It is a quantitative technique which involves systematic using of research. Excuse me. Researcher use questions or uses questions which will guide him towards us arriving at answer. Easy to administer, it permits researcher to gather data on identical variables used for statistical quantitative analysis. Both involve direct questions, which some disadvantaged residents classify as personal. There are certain questions that you cannot ask uh, a respondent. For example, coming to you to ask you how much do you earn every day, or how much does your parents give you as pocket money, what do you do with the money, how do you spend it. Those are your personal ways of doing things, like they are personal. They are not questions that somebody should ask. So all those things are issues in research question based on findings. Now, structural questions may not get the desired response since they are yes or no, might not get the opinion of the people, but because they are only also yes or no. Despite the disadvantage, it is still widely used because it is ideal for large population. Research designs are used for large population. Why? Because it gives you an opportunity to interact with a lot of people and to get a sample out of that particular people. But you cannot talk about research design or getting a sample from the entire population without talking about what population itself is. Population is the total number of those who have the characteristics the researcher wishes to study within the particular research frame. For example, now, like I said earlier on, if I'm taking out a research on women now, and if it has to be specific on women, I will have to look at what it entails on women. Then, of course, my population now will be women of that particular area. The sample is a subset of the population. You cannot carry out research on all the women. For example, all the women in Unsuk, I want to carry the research on all the women in Unsuk. I will have to know the number of women. How many women do we have in Unsuk? And of course, how many numbers am I needing for the research? Then I will have to sample out those number of women and to get the population and to get the sample in which I want. Now, if I'm talking about sample, I'm talking about the subset of the population. Subset in the sense that is a number from the population, because I cannot cover the whole people or the whole women of Unsu. Then I will have to what, get the sample of the women to be able to carry out my research. Now, sample now is a group of people chosen from the population who are thought to represent the population. It has to be carefully chosen. The sample size is important. Sample save money and time. Why? Because you take the particular sample towards what? Towards getting what you want. If I am to cover the whole population of Unsuk now, it means I will have to go from one woman to another. It means I will have to take a longer time. I will have to spend more money because I will have to print the questionnaire that will cover all. And of course, I might not even get everybody on seat. And of course, it will bring a lot of delay in time. But if I'm taking a particular sample, it means I'm saving time, I'm saving money. And more paperwork might come with more error. If I'm taking a lot of people, I will have to print a lot of paper. Might come with a lot of errors. Sampling is divided into two categories. We have the probability and the non-probability sampling. Now, probability sampling is classified into random sampling, systematic, stratified, cluster sampling, and They are all method of sampling. While non-probability sampling are sampling that can use judgmental, and of course, your judgment can help you in sampling the people in which you want to take out or to take the research out. Now, we will come to that, but now let's talk a bit on what the element of scientific thought really is. It is associative, or it is associated of observation of natural element and matters, thinking over the natural processes of growth, how the growth came about, the processes in which it starts, seeking the step of natural phenomenon and processes, critical thinking over developed scientific theories, continual and regularly in directional thinking, seeking variety against doubt. What is changing? What is bringing about the changes? What do we have? Why do we have changes? Why do we have differences in our world? Why do we have differences in what we do, our ways of life, our food, and all those things? Now, we have three major elements of scientific theories. Excuse me. And they are making initial observation, asking questions, collection and finding evidence. Now, all those things, you cannot talk about scientific elements without looking at all these elements of scientific theories that has to do with making initial observation. You look at what is happening. Why is it that initially divorce is seen as usually comes with stigma, but now we have situation whereby even cohabitation now becomes part of our ways of life, where people don't talk or frown out like before. Initially, you don't divorce no matter what the situation is. People tend to remain in their homes, but now you discover that marriages don't last longer. You look at initial observation, you ask questions. Why do we have such kind of issues? Why do we have differences in what is happening? Why the changes? Why all those things? Then you collect and the collection and finding of evidence. Why? Because you don't make generalization without finding evidence. There must be evidence. There must be something to show for it. And that's why you go to field, you carry out a research and come out with finding. Since critical thinking is using facts to formulate a thing, but about something, all of these things are related to critical thinking. You think critically, and of course, you observe, you carry out such kind of research. What then is scientific thought itself? Scientific thought or thinking is a process of reviewing ideas using sciences. You look at ideas, you review it, you look at observe the things, you check what is happening, you observe it, you investigate the processes, you test them, to get knowledge. All those things are scientific thought. The goals is to make outcome of knowledge that may be meaningful to science. The scientific knowledge method is how scientists and researchers apply their scientific thinking to what they do. Now, we have what are the types of scientific thinking? Science use two types of reasoning: the inductive reasoning, the deductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is a form of reasoning that uses related observation at arriving at general conclusion. This type of reasoning is common in descriptive sciences. Now, you look at what is happening, you observe, you relate it to what you are doing. For example, if I'm carrying out a research now, I will have to look at what is happening. I will have to look at what things, where things are, how things are, and how they are related to the work I'm doing. And I will have to relate it to the work I'm doing. And of course, that is where I get my source of information, and that is where I get my backing. At the end of the day, you look at the theories that fits your work, and all those things are very important. And then that is where we use descriptive sciences. Then descriptive sciences itself is a category of science that involves descriptive research that is observing, recording, describing, and classifying phenomenon. Descriptive research is something contracted with hypothesis-driven research, which is focused on testing a particular hypothesis by means of experimentation. Everything you do, you experiment it. Now, descriptive, you look at your work, you describe it, you test it, you experiment it, and of course, you use hypothesis at the end of the day. All those things are important towards descriptive research. Thank you for listening.